G'day, I'm Johanna, aka Passive Royal. Today I'm going to show you my favorite sewing tools that changed my life. These are tools that I've acquired over the years and by no means started out with. These aren't tools that you need, but if you're passionate about sewing and ready to up your game, it can save time and make your finished objects just that much better. I first want to acknowledge some basics, things that a beginner sewer should already have that won't be covered in today's list. Things like a sewing machine. I'll post my make and model here just in case you're curious. We have some fabric scissors. These are from a antiques vintage shop. I do think they are a modern reproduction, but they're actually quite weighty and they've got a good feel. On the topic of scissors, we also have some thread cutters, snip snips as I like to call them. Seam ripper. I have a Clover seam ripper. I used to use the basic ones at Spotlight, but I did find that a seam ripper is something worth investing in. We also have a basic measuring tape. Again, this one is the basic one that you can get from Spotlight. There are a few different ones. This is my particular favorite. I have 2 or 3 of these floating around. Rulers are another great thing if you are working with sewing. This is my particular favorite. A lot of people say this is their favorite, which is the 2 by 18 inch ruler. Well, I do live in Australia and we are metric. Sewing does kind of tend to head into the inches territory quite often. So I've actually found this to be absolutely fine, works wonders. There's also sewing needles, so hand sewing needles. I just use the basic ones from Spotlight. I am thinking about upgrading some of my sets to some more proper ones, but these ones do the job. Sometimes I do find that there's a better one than most in a pack. And when I do find one that I like, I actually, in my little mess here, I leave a thread on it at all times, so it's quite easy to find my favorite needle of the moment. Some thread, some basic polyester thread, it works fine. Again, this is the Spotlight basic brand, which is Birch. And then we also have some Goodman thread if you are feeling fancy. Pins are the last thing in this basic portion. You definitely don't need pins, they don't have to be fancy, they just have to be something that works, and you can totally freehand it if this is not for you. That's really all you need to get started, but you may find that you want to upgrade your tools over time. The first thing that changed my sewing life is finding a tailor's chalk that works for me. For a long time, I couldn't find a chalk that was easy to use. I found the pencils, or admittedly the cheaper chalks that I was trying to use, they were very waxy and they wouldn't leave a mark on the fabric easily, and I found that really counterintuitive. It would pull on the threads of the fabric, and the marks that I ended up making were so firmly in there that it was extremely hard to wash out, if at all. So I avoided chalk for quite a long time, and I transferred to using tailor's tacks, which is a more professional suiting way of doing things. However, it does take up more time, and sometimes I just want something that works. So recently I decided to take a risk again and try a new chalk brand. This particular brand is Hancock London. Honestly, this is the best brand that I have. I have it in 2 colors. I probably should invest in more, but to be honest, I really only ever use white chalk on dark to medium fabrics, and I'm actually terrible. I actually use either just a normal pencil or maybe a watercolor pencil on some other fabrics where perhaps yellow or white do not show up easily, and I just use that very lightly. However, if the fabric I'm using with is delicate or very expensive or very white, and I'm very worried about any markings being left behind after washing, I will tend to go back to the tailor's tacks. However, these chalks have worked wonders and definitely changed my sewing life. Number 2 on this list is a tailor's chalk sharpener. For the longest time, I always wondered, how do people keep their tailor's chalk sharp? Once you have a few goes of it, it ends up pretty blunt and the lines that you get aren't that accurate on your fabric. Well, when I was searching for new tailor's chalk to give a go, I found that the same brand, the Hancock London, I believe it is Hancock's Chalk London, yep, I found that they had a chalk sharpener, which I was stunned. To be honest, when I saw it online, I had absolutely no concept how this worked, but I decided to give it a gamble, and it's amazing. All you do is you slide your chalk along here, and there is sort of like these ridges, these sharp, not like so sharp that you'll hurt yourself, but sharp ridges that you drag the chalk along, and it's kind of this triangle shape, so that as you drag it along, it shaves it and it sharpens it to a nice tip where you can use your chalk quite nicely again. It's also kind of great because you can kind of like curve it, so if you want that curved to be sharpened on the corner, it works out pretty well. This honestly is the best kept secret on this list. that I wish I knew so much earlier. Number 3 on this list is an acoustic board. Now, you might be thinking, what does an acoustic board have to do with sewing? Well, I actually use this acoustic board as a cutting mat. I previously used one of those cardboard cutting mats that had 1-inch markings across it, and I found it pretty helpful. However, every time that I put a pin into the cardboard, it kind of created this crater or ridge in the cardboard. So whenever I laid fabric out for a new project, there was all these lumps and bumps, and sometimes it snagged the fabric. Like, you wouldn't think that a little bit of cardboard might snag a fabric, but hey, sometimes it was pretty sharp. It was very, very weird. Furthermore, the cardboard was actually quite slippery. So when I had fabric and I was placing it on the cardboard, it was very easily moved around and it did not stay in place. So when I was trying to look for my new and updated solution, I wanted something that would hold the fabric, still be maneuverable, but hold it kind of relatively well, and something that would be easily stored. I wasn't too worried about any measurements or markings for me personally. I'm not afraid of pulling out a ruler and making sure my fabric is lined up with the edge of the cutting board or anything like that. And after some research, I found that acoustic board was the thing for me. I did have to go to and this is just from Bunnings. I did have to travel to a slightly out of area Bunnings, not that far, but out of area enough to find the particular color. So most Bunnings stock I think it's a gray or a white acoustic board, but I in particular wanted this fluorescent green. So I traveled, it was there, I think it was like 20 bucks. I might be lying, I'll post a link or a picture here as well. It was amazing. I love it. I actually use it on this table. The actual board is bigger than this table itself. So 1, it has increased my surface area. And 2, if I'm, let's say, we're in a bit of a corner here and it can be a bit tight, I can lay my fabric out, pin my pattern pieces on, but let's say I'm still in this tight space, rather than me having to get around to every side of the table to be able to cut, I can simply move the acoustic board to wherever might be easiest for me to cut. Of course, being conscious that if there's any fabric overflowing, I wrap it up onto the edge of the acoustic board before I turn, so it all turns as one piece and there's no drag on the fabric that is on the acoustic board. But yeah, I love it. I highly recommend it. People don't talk about it enough. Number 4 on this list is my sleeve board and my, point press? Let me check my notes. My point presser and clapper. Now, these 2 items, I think I bought at separate times slowly. This was number 1 and this was number 2 because I found that the sleeve board was my personal priority at the time. It's really great. We have a slightly wider, quite symmetric oblong shape, and then we have more of a tapered, thinner one on the other side. So it kind of gives you some options based on what you're working with. This is really great not only for sleeves and ironing those sleeve seams, but I actually find it to be pretty great on top of my normal ironing board. So normally I will place this on top of my ironing board and I will actually lay over any seam, whether it's a side bodice seam. Sometimes if I'm cheating, I might even do my darts on here. But I find that sometimes it's easier because the base of an iron is actually quite large. So sometimes when you're ironing a seam, you don't want it to interfere with any other parts of the fabric, especially if it has darts. It can be quite easy to be ironing your seam, but for lack of a better term, the butt of your iron has crinkled, bent, created a crease where you don't want it, because we just want to be focusing on that seam. So for in hard to reach places, or honestly, sometimes it just helps open up the seam because the weight of the fabric draping over helps it stay open. This is actually really great, not just for sleeves, but also for helping press seams. Now, the point presser is another great tool. This particularly is great for shirt collars, and I make a lot of boys and men's button-down shirts, so lots of collars come across this table right here. And I decided that once I had started making them more often, this was something for me to invest in. This is something that I can use to help press down the collar seam nicely and finish it quite well. It gets in that tight to reach places, not only for collars, but some other garments you might have some corners that you want to get into, or even like for a tote bag. So for a tote bag corner, you can't necessarily get to the corner on the sleeve board tips. So how can we get to that tote bag corner? Well, this is how you do it, which is really great. Now this doubles up as a clapper. A clapper is a piece of wood, usually in this kind of oblong shape, and it can be used to help set seams. I forget the exact scientific part about it, but if I recollect, it has something to do with being able to hold the seam in place, but also kind of get rid of it quickly. So by the time that the seam is in the steam state, you've removed your iron. You don't want the steam to kind of allow the fluidity of the fabric to kind of like relax again. You want it to stay put. You want it to relax and cool and dry in that state. So what you do is you press your seam and then you put the clapper on top of it. One, to give it that pressure, and two, I do believe the wood allows to kind of help absorb that steam up, and it kind of, you know, it's almost like a dry iron, but it's to help it cool. Because it's that cooling from the heat to the cool that helps set those seams. Number 5 on the list is this tailor's ham. It's as basic as it gets. It smells really good. I think because there's actually cedar wood in here. Don't be fooled. You could totally make your own ham, but it is actually quite important that it's filled with wood chips, sorry. It's filled with wood chips, which is really great. I actually put off buying a ham for a very long time. I did get away with relatively well using the tapered end of the shirt press for doing darts. I would do the tip right up to about there and then leave the rest of my fabric to flow. But that only gets you so far. So for when I made my wedding dress, I decided to invest in this because I definitely wanted nice bust darts, nice, clean, crisp bust darts for my wedding dress. And I wish I had done this sooner. I wish I had bought a proper tailor's ham, and now I have one and it's great and I use it almost every time. So bust darts. Number 6 on this list is in this box. Where is it? It is a bodkin. Now a bodkin is almost like a loop of metal, and there is a little gap in here. It's almost like a thread if I have an example. So here is a bit of elastic. Then what you do is you pull it through a channel like a waistband, or you could also use it to put through a drawstring or something like that. I did not know they existed until I got it as a hand-me-down one time, and this is literally anytime that I need to put a string or an elastic through a channel, this is the immediate go-to, and it has made my life so much easier, so much quicker. It's way less fiddly than trying to use a safety pin. Of course, if you're not doing it that often, just use the safety pin. You don't need to go out and buy this. However, if this is a common sewing task that you come across, this is absolutely worth the investment. Number 7 on this list, I ummed and ahed about buying for a long time, but now that I do have it, here it is. It's a bias tape maker. Now that I have it, it is honestly a lifesaver. I use it in probably, 4 out of 5 projects? No. I use it in probably 3 out of 5 projects that I make, because I actually do use bias tape quite often in the particular projects that I make. I also had to decide what size to get. This particular one is a 1/2 inch one. It says 12 on the back, if that means anything, but what you do is you cut your fabric on the bias at 1 inch width, you feed it through here, out it comes nice and folded, just like bias tape, and it comes out to that 1/2 inch width, which is quite common and I use it quite a lot. Now previous to this, I used to either buy bias tape by the packet, which was actually quite expensive, and also they don't come in 100% cotton, or it's very difficult to come by. They usually are about 20% cotton, 80% polyester, some sort of combination of that, if not 100% polyester. And oftentimes I try to go to the effort to use natural fabrics, and when I do, I can be disappointed when I have to use a polyester binding. So at times I used to cut, fold and iron my own bias tape without this tool. Now at first, much like anything that you upgrade within your sewing journey, you should see if this is something that you want to invest in. Is it a common task that you're going to do? Because I think this was like $12 or something like that. $12 might not seem like much, but if you go out and buy 3 of them but you never use them, that's money that you don't need to spend. However, I was using this quite often, and now I'm actually at the point where I have quite a stash of bias tape. As you can see here, obviously I've made way more than I need for a few projects, and I do have more elsewhere, but I just wanted to demonstrate that because I have this bias tape maker, every time that I go to the effort to make bias tape, I actually tend to make a little bit more than I need. sometimes because I miscalculate, and sometimes because I know that either this is a common fabric that I use, I actually do use a lot of the same fabric because if I like it, I like it, or if this is a common color or fabric that I'll use, I'll actually make quite a bit, and it actually means that I have to spend less time per project making this because I'll just do a big batch. It's also a great way to use up some scrap fabric from your project, and therefore we have less waste, and it's great. The last thing I would say on this is that sometimes it's actually quite nice to have a little bit of pop of color, whether it's inside your garment or around the like armhole, to have kind of like that bit of burst of flair. It's like having a fun lining in a fancy coat. It's actually really handy, nice, highly recommend if you use bias tape at all. Number 8 on my list is my cable needle. This particular one is a Clover plastic one. It came in a pack of 3. I knit a lot, so I use these a lot. But what I found is I actually use this as a point turner. This sounds so silly, but part of it is I fundamentally refused to buy one of those plastic point turners, but I also couldn't figure out a different alternative solution that worked with what I had on hand that were part of the popular recommendations. I know a popular recommendation is to use the tip of your scissors to put it in there. My scissor tips, to be honest, they could quite easily, grab some fabric that I didn't necessarily want it to grab. I did use knitting needles for a bit, but I found that I was a bit too vigorous trying to turn that point out, and I would pop the seam a little bit, and that was no good. So I had to try and find an alternative. Now, is this that different to a knitting needle? No, not necessarily, but it being more delicate also helps me mentally be more delicate. It's easy to get into tight places. It being plastic and also being more of a blunt tip than some of my knitting needles that I tried using also helps. And I don't know, it just, for some reason this works for me, whether it makes me be more delicate. But yeah, I really recommend this. Now, I sort of touched on this one earlier, but hear me out. Silk pins. Now, I know I said pins at the beginning of my video, but it was a while before I realized silk pins are made different. Now, they are longer, sharper, and thinner than normal pins, which means that, I don't know what I'm going to show you, it's not really like, it's not going to make much of a difference. But they're longer, thinner, and sharper than most pins. This makes it really easy to get into fabric without accidentally catching threads. We've all been there. Them being longer makes them easier to handle at times, and the glass heads mean that they won't melt when you go to iron if you need to have the pins in there while you iron. I love these. They have caused me so much less pain since I got them. I used to accidentally pull threads all the time by using the Birch brand that I found at Spotlight pins, which again, if they're all you have, they can definitely get you by. Just be conscious of 1, using them gently, and 2, the types of fabrics that you're putting them in. So don't put them into like super expensive projects, but if you're going to be using cotton poplin, giving something a go, they're absolutely going to serve you fine. But if you're going to be sewing for more than one project, I would say definitely just start off with silk pins. These are the Clover silk pins. I love them, I can't go back. Now, the last item, number 10 on this list, is the hot hemmer. Now, Johanna, what is a hot hemmer? I asked that question too. What it is a piece of felt, almost like a card-like structure to it with measurements on it. It allows me to not have to mark my dress or my hem or whatever before I go to the ironing board. I can simply take my garment to the ironing board. If I know that I want to have a 2 centimeter or 2.5 centimeter hem, I can simply lay it on my fabric, fold my fabric over, and then I can just iron it in place without having to have those markings. This is actually pretty good, and I use this mostly on more delicate makes that I make, like my wedding dress, or things that are very crisp and white and I don't accidentally want to get pencil or chalk markings on there that I can't get out. I would say that this does take a little bit more time than just drawing a line, folding, ironing, because you can kind of get in a rhythm if you've drawn a line of the fold, iron, and then you can kind of keep it up, keep it up, keep it up, keep it up, and keep going. It doesn't glide in that same way when you use this tool. However, If you are sewing a delicate or a project with very expensive fabric that you don't want to risk, this is a great alternative. Now, the hem won't be necessarily as crisp because this card is a tiny little bit thick. I would say like 2 millimeters thick, but it gives you kind of like a press mark, which is almost like an insurance policy. Make sure that it is where you want it to be. You can then simply remove it and then double down on that press to secure it in place. But it's a winner. It's definitely a winner. Highly recommend. And that's my sewing tools that I didn't know I needed that changed my life. These tools are an investment and may not be best suited to beginners, but if you're on your sewing journey and you've always wondered about these tools, did people actually use them, or never heard of some of these tools, I hope it enlightened you in some way. Let me know in the comments what your favorite sewing tool is, a hidden gem, or what you're most excited about investing in next. Personally, I'm looking into getting a buttonhole cutter. It's almost like a chisel with like, you know, like a tip and a handle, and you like hammer it and then it will leave a nice cut, crisp buttonhole in your work. But I'm holding off on getting that until the next suit or winter coat that I might be making, where the investment would get like a first use case very quickly. Hope that was fun. Thanks for watching. Okay, thanks, bye.